The time to have made good choices was back in the 90s and the early 2000s. And we didn't make good choices as a country, as an American polity. And now we're faced with a number of bad choices. But if we fail to make the uncomfortable choice today, we're going to create even more uncomfortable choices down the road.
You know, at some point over the last 20 years, we seem to have lost sight of who we are, and we were more concerned with the types of houses we lived in and the speed of the cars that we drove.
The United States has consumed more than it's produced systematically for at least a decade. What country, ask yourself, in history can do that indefinitely, forever?
The government and the Federal Reserve are continuing to encourage people to spend their money. That is not a stable economy.
That's the wrong policy for the future. What we need to do is encourage investment and saving.
Now, that'll make it harder for our economy to grow the way it has in the past, with consumption being the engine.
So in other words, the U.S. economy probably won't grow as fast as possible, but that's fine if we can learn to be happy with what we have, as opposed to the system fully designed around getting people to want more than what they have, and they're unhappy unless they have that more.
My generation, the baby boomers, basically participated in intergenerational theft. We borrowed from our children, and in some cases from our grandchildren. I hope we don't go as far as our great-grandchildren.
And I don't know one parent who's willing to say, well, let me enjoy my life at the expense of my children. But that seems to be what's happening.
Now, the interesting question is, when you've been on that path that long and the imbalances have grown up that big, what's the process for getting off the bad path onto a better one?
We got to create something the world wants. And that's what we've got to get back to in the United States.
What drives long-term growth is the real world, education, capital spending, the quality of your workers. They're the things you should worry about.
There's a myth that's grown up that the United States is a weak tiger that can't produce goods that people want to sell. Far from the truth. We're still the largest exporter in the world. We have the human capital, the knowledge. We need to just have the incentives.
Somehow we need to go to an economy that is using its resources, operating at full employment, but doing so in a way that isn't reliant on bubbles anyplace, that is a solid, responsible use of resources.
That means you need to have interest rates that don't discourage savings.
Less subsidies for housing and debt and domestic consumption. Prices closer to what they more naturally should be. So you can get the growth going again in a healthier way, then the burden of the debt gradually gets less and less and less. But of course, the transition is bound to be painful. And then the question becomes, how much short-term pain for how much long-term gain?
The end of inflation, that happened because the public wanted it to happen. This is a democratic country. What do we want the Federal Reserve to do for us, for the citizenry? We want them to provide low inflation and relatively stable growth. They can't smooth out all the bumps in the road, and we can't expect them to do that. But we can expect them to do a better job over the future than they have on average in the past.
It's tempting to believe the crisis is over, but we may be simply passing through the eye of the storm. To break free of the cycle of booms and busts, the Fed must find a new way forward.
So it's a very important crossroads for us. Will we be willing to support the central bank as it raises interest rates to levels where savings becomes something that you value again, so that our society can really begin to build for the future? Easy for me to sit here and say, this is how we need to do it, but very difficult to implement for anyone. for the Congress, for the President, and for the Central Bank of the United States.
More than ever in its 100-year history, the Federal Reserve holds the future of our economic system in its hands. Can the Fed help foster an economy that's built to last? One not based on stock or housing bubbles, but on sensible, productive investments that will enrich not just some of us, but all? Or will it continue to offer the empty promise of money for nothing?